Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 5 as we look at events that help shape the New Testament. And we don't have much left to cover, so we'll finish it up in this particular video here. But we left off with essentially the Roman-Jewish War, where the Jewish people in Judea are tired of the corrupt Roman officials, and so they attempt to, throw them out and essentially get rid of the Roman Empire, or at least the Roman Empire having control over them more specifically. But their attempt was unsuccessful, and the Romans ended up destroying the temple in Jerusalem. Traditionally, it's said on the same day that the first one was destroyed, and I believe the date is August the 24th. But the temple was destroyed, and all that's left of it is what's known as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. And of the religious slash political parties that existed at that time and were around during Jesus's lifetime, the one to survive was the Pharisees. So all modern day Jews descend from the Pharisees. And I also mentioned how the Gospels, the canonical Gospels, treats the Pharisees very, very harshly. And arguably, a reason for why is because they would be the political party during the time period that, of course, the Gospels were written. They would have been the individuals stating how Jesus did not fulfill the messianic requirements. And then how, with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, many of the 613 commandments within Judaism could no longer be practiced. And the 10 commandments, they're just but 10 of the 613 commandments or laws within Judaism. And modern day Jews can't follow all of those 613 because a lot of them relate to the temple system, the temple cult, and there is no longer a temple. And I also mentioned that even among um, contemporary Jews, the commandments that still can be followed, a lot of Jews find that many of them are just no longer necessary, such as the dietary laws, for instance. They find them to be no longer necessary. But moving on, just a couple more events. In the year 90 CE/AD, a group of rabbis gathered together at what is called the Council of Jamnia, and they declared that only the Hebrew scriptures were valid for the Jewish people and that the later Greek books of the Septuagint were to be rejected. If I had been teaching this class 100 years ago, I probably would have stated that this was the closing of the Hebrew Bible for the Jewish people. But when historians went back and re-examined the evidence, they saw that that's not quite what happened. So what exactly, was going on here? What took place here? Well, this would have been, 20 years after the Roman Jewish War. So we're a generation, following. And tensions had calmed down. And so a number of rabbis asked Roman officials if they could open a rabbinical school in Israel. And they were given permission. And so they opened a school at Jamnia. And because, this had been, a significant amount of time after the Roman Jewish War and, attitudes regarding Jewish people, this school became a very, very prominent school within Judaism. And so essentially, the decisions made by the rabbis here carried a lot of weight and essentially carried on over throughout the Jewish world. And basically, what they declared was that the writings of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, which were originally written in Hebrew, that these were the valid texts for the Jewish people, that these were canonical, the rule or the standard. That's what the word canonical means. But that the other books, such as, the Maccabean books, or the Book of Wisdom, or the Book of Sirach, um, they're not considered, to be canonical for the Jewish people. Now, that doesn't change their historical importance. Like in the case, with the Maccabean books, they tell the Hanukkah story, but they're not considered to be canonical or divinely inspired. However, The Septuagint continued to be used by Christians, and so this became their Old Testament. So for the Christian people, this became, what they would call their Old Testament, the Septuagint and the works that were part of it. Um, to give some examples of why they would use the Septuagint, one example I can think of would be the Gospel of Matthew, where Matthew talks about how the virgin shall conceive and bear forth a child. Well, what Matthew was referencing was Isaiah 7:14 to be more specific. However, the Hebrew word there is not virgin, it's maiden or young woman, but the Greek renders it as virgin. Um, Another example I can think of would be in Paul's letter to the Galatians, where he is talking about the giving of the law, the Torah, to Moses, but he mentions how it was ordained through angels, essentially trying to make a case that it weakens the effect of the law. And where Paul is getting this from is from chapter 33 of Deuteronomy. And in the Greek, it does mention angels being around while the law is being given. However, our earliest Hebrew manuscripts do not have any references to angels. Now, I'll mention, and I'm sure I'll mention this again when we get into that letter to the Galatians, but I would say that the argument put forward that somehow angels being around weakens the effect of the law, I think is subject to interpretation. But regardless of which, that's where Paul got that notion from. So, anyway, that's essentially all that we have for events that help shape the New Testament. So, if you do have any questions, please send me an email. Till then, take care.